that looks good. All right. I think we are ready to go. Um, Welcome back, everyone. Glad you made it. We're in our third and final session tonight, and I'll finish the night by giving a little bit of a commercial for the next series of classes, which is sort of related. But as a brief review, the first session, we took a look at Jewish teachings around the idea of death and afterlife and the sanctity of life and whatnot. Second session, we dealt with the psychological elements of individuals as they are close to the act of dying, whether it's their own or, in many, many more cases, that of a loved one. And this session, I've taken kind of a large amount of information, and I have crushed it into to one session on rituals and traditional technology in the sense of what our observances can do for us when they're employed. And so we're gonna go through a lot of material tonight. A lot of it is going to be very familiar to you. It's meant to be an overview of how Judaism has developed traditions around getting through this really difficult period. Some of the terms might be new. Some of the concepts might be new. Inevitably, I will miss things that you have heard of, and you want to bounce off me, and you should. You here and at home, you should just interrupt and say, "Hey, what about that? I heard about this once, or I saw this another time," and we'll talk about where that tradition may have come from, and I will then probably label it a Baba Misa. But that's the best part of our tradition, are the Baba Misas. So I'm going to begin by doing a blessing. Damn it, I think I forgot to bring it again. La'asok b'divrei Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. The idea of that blessing tonight is that having the conversation around our traditions, our rituals, our offerings, you may actually be affected by something that causes you to set something up or make something known or consider something you hadn't before. So maybe that blessing of Torah will come true in that you leave changed. So we're going to begin thinking about the process of dying and then mourning. So we're going to begin before death, and we're thinking about as we get really close to death. Now, we've talked a little bit about hospice, and I'm not going to go into it too much at this point. But I do want to just articulate how valuable it can be. You already know why it's valuable from a medical point of view. It is really, really healthy when the medical establishment says, we're ready for what's next, not we can't help you anymore. And very often that's the only moment when our Western doctors, who've been trained to keep people alive as long as possible, finally say, there's nothing else I can do. Let's put you on hospice. That probably means we've waited too long. And it also communicates the entirely wrong attitude about hospice. Hospice is not a failure, and it is not I'll leave it at that. Hospice is an opportunity, both to alleviate discomfort, that we know. But hospice is also that opportunity for the whole family to say, in very clear and explicit terms, the conversation is changing now. Now we're not talking about how much more life we can squeeze out of grandpa. Now we're talking about how this is a chance for us to come together, to celebrate, to enjoy what's left, to live. Hospice is about living. So I can't emphasize enough that hospice is something in many, many, many situations that you should be open to if it's offered. And if it's not offered, you might want to talk to the doctor sooner than you think and say, when do we start talking about hospice? That is not you throwing up your hands and giving up and surrendering. That is you proactively saying, we want to love this this life a little bit longer. Yeah, Diane? So my understanding is the technical differences between palliative care and hospice have more to do with legality than they do with actual care plans. I think palliative care often happens in the hospital, and hospice sometimes happens in the hospital. Um, Hospice has a technicality where the doctor has to have a prognosis of fewer than 6 months left in life. And sometimes a person lives long past that. But hospice also puts in place very specific limitations on what kinds of next steps are taken. And I don't know what those technicalities are with palliative care. They're both great. You know, they're both recognizing that being comfortable is something that's reasonable to expect. So palliative care is also a good route to go. Dennis?
Calvary Calvary Hospital, the air ads make exactly that point, that this is something to be cherished. It's a time for family to come together, to honor the person that is dying, to that person who is dying, enjoy having his family and friends and what have you with him. So I think it makes exactly the point you're making.
That's terrific. Thank you. So we are getting close to the moment of death. We have had, hopefully, the opportunity for loved ones to come on by, to make the pilgrimage, to say what needs to be said. And by the way, there's a traditional, there's a great book that simply suggests there are three things to say at the end of a person's life. I love you. Please forgive me. And I forgive you. I think I got it right, but maybe not in right order. Those are the kinds of things that you might just want to feel like bring the whole relationship to a healthy culmination. The person in bed may not know what you're talking about. They may have no idea why they need to be forgiven. But if there's something in you that is just hanging on, it's nice to wrap up those loose ends. Very often when I am called to a hospice room or a hospital room, I'm asked to lead Mi Sheberach. And I want to take just a moment and talk about what Mi Sheberach is and why it's appropriate in a hospital room, a hospice room, where we don't expect the person to recover to fullness of life. Mi Sheberach is about bringing ourselves back to wholeness. And for a person who is struggling perhaps with issues around their own death, healing in that sense means finding peace. For people in the room who are unrealistic about what might be next, Mi Sheberach can bring a measure of comfort and acceptance. There's no illusion. All of us are going to die. Denying that can create suffering that may not be necessary. So while we're talking about the palliative care of the person in the bed, there's also the ability to comfort and care for the people in the room who are suffering. So Mi Sheberach can do that. And so, I try to find the right way to make sure everyone in the room is clear on why we're offering Mi Sheberach when this person is so clearly close to death. I had the statements wrong. The three things you're supposed to say to the person are, thank you, I'm sorry, I love you. It makes more sense. Yeah, let's go with that. And of course you say it in your own way, but thank you, I'm sorry, and I love you. What a beautiful set of expressions. Much better than what I said before. The next thing which the rabbi might offer, or you might ask for if it's not offered, is the vidui. On Yom Kippur, We have multiple viduis where we say Ashamnu Baga, or we say Al Chetanu Lefanecha. There are these litanies of confession, but there's a confession before death. And ideally, well, it's never ideal. I don't think I've ever had someone articulate it themselves. I think in every case, I've always been the one to articulate it on behalf of the person in bed. They may be alert and awake and ask me to do so, but theoretically, a person should say it in the first person. What usually happens is I read it in first person, but for them, and all it says is that I prefer life, but if I must come to an end, then I pray that that I do so at peace, and that that all should know that any wrongs done against me, I hereby forgive, and I beg forgiveness for all the things that I have done knowingly or unknowingly to those around me. It's just this beautiful articulation, and then a request that that my loved ones should be kept safe and healthy and live vibrant lives. So the vidui is just a really lovely thing. Now, it sounds a little bit like last rites, but it's totally different than that. But psychologically, it can be a little jarring for people, especially if we're not familiar with the tradition of confession before death. And so, if the clergy person, the rabbi or a cantor, offers you vidui for your loved one, you can say, "Oh, no, thank you. I appreciate that, but no thanks." Or you can say, "That would be great. Thank you." Everything we talk about here, everything, I think, everything is an a la carte menu. It's all meant to help you and your loved one get through this piece of the journey. So I'm offering you the full menu, and when it comes time, you'll say yes to that, no to that. What the hell is that? And you'll put together with support. You know, the funeral director will ask the right questions. I'll ask the questions, and all you have to say is, "Yes, please," or "No, I don't think so." Okay. So the confession is one. And then we have this beautiful, no, not beautiful, sort of beautiful, but horrifically ugly story of Rabbi Akiva being flayed to death by the Romans. And as his last strength is ebbing out of his just destroyed body, he offers the Shema. And it's the prototype for us wishing, if it were possible, that the last things out of our mouth might be the Shema. So when the rabbi comes to the hospital room or the hospice bed or your home, if the person is passing in the house, Shema is very likely to be something offered. And even if there's every assumption that this person still got 4, 5, 10 days to go, the rabbi might still offer it. And in that case, don't think that he or she is saying, "Well, you know, I don't know if I'm going to be back, so let's just do Shema now in case." What they might also be saying is, "Yeah, the person's not gone yet, but it's lovely to gather family together and to all articulate Shema together, even if the patient is no longer verbal." It's a lovely thing to do. And I would encourage you to accept the invitation to do Shema together. After the rabbi leaves, before you say goodnight to your loved one and leave them in the care of whoever is there, say Shema again with them. And when you come in the next morning and they're still breathing, say Shema again with them. You can't oversay Shema. Just say Shema. It's lovely. It's meaningful. The other thing which you might think of doing is singing a little bit. No matter how bad your voice is, it's remarkable, and there's lots and lots of scientific studies out there to prove what I've seen anecdotally myself many times, and that is that long after a person is verbal, music, especially music from our early life, it gets right through the fog. And so people with dementia who haven't spoken in a month, I've sat down, it's happened to me a small handful of times, where we'll sing, Hine matovun manaim shevet, and their lips will just start moving with me. Sometimes even maybe a little bit of sound. And it is so touching, once you think your loved one is gone, to have just a little reassurance that they're not quite gone. Their mind may not be what you wish it was, but they're in there somewhere. So singing is also a beautiful element for this moment. Questions? at home? I don't see a hand, so just go ahead and unmute and tell me you've got something. Let's move forward now to the moment of death. Um, very often, it's unclear whether this is the actual moment of death. I've actually only been in the room twice when someone passed away. I think there are lots of reasons for that, but in both cases, it was unclear whether the person was really gone, because it's not uncommon for a person's chest to exhale and go down and stay down for a while, and then maybe take a few more breaths. And so, so the hospice nurses, the doctors, they have their own mechanism for determining whether death has actually come. But once it's clear, then there are a couple of traditions which might speak to you. They're bubamaisas, but one of them is to light a candle near the head of the deceased. And in a hospital, of course, you can't do that. Or in a hospice facility, of course, you can't light a candle. So maybe you want to have one of those little tea lights, the electric tea lights. I've got 150 of them in my study. If you want to take a pocket full on the way out, they're yours. You light it near their head, and it comes from the quote in Isaiah. Let's just say Isaiah. Ner Adonai nishmat adam, that the soul of human is the candle of God. And so that little flame flickering near their head represents the soul having now left the body. And the next bubamaisa is, if you want, the tradition is to open the window in the room. Hospitals almost never open windows. You almost never can do that. The tradition says it's to give the soul easy egress, to get out of the room and up to wherever it's going. Psychologically, it can feel really good just to get some fresh air in the room. I've been in the room with mate team. A mate is a corpse. I've been in the room with mate team many times, and it is a heavy, heavy energy. So sometimes opening a window can really go a long way towards that. Once your loved one dies, and just for the sake of a trivia question for halacha, there are 7 categories of mourner. You are a mourner if the deceased is your mother, father, sister, brother, son, daughter, or spouse. Those are the only categories, technically. That means technically, when your grandparent dies, you're not a mourner. The mourner's strict laws don't technically apply to you. Now, I know that is only a trivia question. When people feel like a mourner, they're a mourner. So when the person dies, you immediately, as a mourner, enter a period of time called aninut. The onen is the mourner in limbo. In other words, from the time your loved one dies until the time that we bury them, there is this unsettled energy. And during that time, as a mourner, there are no obligations on you, and there are no apologies. So when you're talking to the rabbi and there's a lot of stuff to be decided, and the rabbi's asking you all the questions, and you're frazzled, you're overwhelmed, and you're saying, I don't know. I'm sorry, Rabbi. I'm just overwhelmed. You need to strike the words "I'm sorry" out of your lexicon for those days of the interim. Nobody expects anything more from you. You're handling it exactly the way you need to. Aninut is that little window of time where we're just getting everything else taken care of. Now, depending on where the death happens, one of your first calls will be to the funeral home. Your second call will be to the rabbi. And together, the 3 entities, meaning you and your family, the funeral director, and I, or whichever rabbi you call, I hope it's me, we'll all kind of work together and figure out what the next steps look like. You'll be asked questions like, well, what day feels right? We have a tradition of doing it without without delay. There is no law that says it has to be done within 24 hours or within 36 hours. All the time, people say, my granddaughter has an exam for her, her psychology class on Thursday. She can't get on a plane until that night. Could we do it Friday morning? Of course we can do it Friday morning, even if it means waiting an extra day so your granddaughter can be there. Of course. When the body needs to be transported, very often that creates a delay. If the person dies in Florida, but is being buried up here, of course there's going to be a delay. All it means is we take that mitzvah seriously and we don't goof around as if we would, right? Okay. So one of the questions that you'll be asked by the funeral director, if it's a Jewish funeral home, or in our case here in Stamford, the homes are not Jewish funeral homes, but they all do Jewish funerals, and they're fabulous. All three of them. Shalom, what's it called? Shalom Funeral Chapel. Thank you. Shalom Chapel, Leo P. Gallagher, and what's the one starts with a C? Canetta. Thank you. Carol knows her funeral homes. They all do great jobs. So the funeral home is going to ask you this question: would you like tahara and shomer for your loved one? You'll forget what that is, but I'll remind you now and I'll remind you again then. Tahara is from the word tahor. It is pure, purification. So this is the ritual of the Chevra Kadisha, the burial society, coming to the funeral home after hours. The funeral directors, I don't know, they leave them the keys or something. They go home at 5 o'clock and the Chevra Kadisha comes in after hours. The building is quiet. There's no talking except for very minimal communication about instruction, no idle chit chat. Sometimes someone is singing a little bit or reciting psalms. And in that time, what they do is they lovingly take the body and with modesty, men take care of male bodies. They cover it over modestly. They remove anything left over from the hospital. Sometimes there are syringes that need to come out or medical tape if they were taken right from the hospital, although usually that stuff is taken out. Sometimes there are, I don't know, makeup still left on the body or piercings or things like this, and they'll just lovingly return the body to its purest form, including just pouring gently nice warm water over the body. Once the body has been lovingly washed, then it's dressed in we call them shrouds, but they're really just pajamas. They're nondescript sort of linen pajamas. The feet are sewn closed. The sleeves are sewn closed, so there you don't see hands and feet. There's no pockets. It's kind of a tunic that goes over the top part, over the top of pants, with a drawstring, and then there's a hood that kind of goes over the person's head. And this is meant to equalize all in death. That you might think, oh, I'm going to bury him in his best suit. His best suit isn't going to do any good, and it's not. He doesn't care if he's in his best suit. Some people find the idea of tahara really comforting. No pockets because you take nothing with you, right? So you might choose tahara. The second piece that I mentioned was shomer. You might think about Lecha Dodi, Shamor V'Zachor. Shamor, shomer is a guard. So the guard is a person who sits with the body when the building is otherwise empty. So from 5 p.m. when the funeral director goes home until 9 a.m. the next morning, there might be a couple of shifts where somebody will sit there and usually read psalms or study a text, but they'll sit there all night long. The idea being, and we spoke about this, I think, once before, that the deceased can't care for themselves. And so until they are laid to rest in the ground, it's somebody else's job to watch over their body in ways that they can't. So it's simply making sure that that body is cared for. Occasionally, there are reasons where a burial at a cemetery wraps up, but the casket is still quite exposed, and the family leaves. And I never leave. I'll stay there until the gravediggers come with their backhoe and they cover over the casket. Because I don't know, I take that responsibility to be meaningful. And if what I've just described about serving as Chevra Kadisha, the body preparation, or Shomer, if that appeals to you, the Chevra Kadisha in Stamford would love more volunteers. At this point, I think we only have the one volunteer from Sinai who takes part. But if it's something you think you can handle, and you can say, by the way, if it's a child, you can say, I'm out on this one. I can't do this one. Or if it was an accident and the body is not in complete shape, you can say, I can't handle that. I'm sorry. I'm going to sit this one out. But if it's something you think you can do, what a beautiful mitzvah. So that's Shomer and Tahara. And if this doesn't speak to you, that's fine. When the funeral director asks, you just say, no, thank you. Done. Move on. You'll be picking out a casket, either for yourself ahead of time or for your loved one. Pick out whatever you want. The tradition is simple. The tradition is the cheapest box they've got. Now, we all know that it's a plain pine box. There are multiple levels of plain pine boxes. Some of them are amazing. If should Julie forget, I'm counting on all of you to know, I want the cheapest. I want the one that's kind of ricketily made and barely hold together. That's what I want. This again it's about returning everything as rapidly as possible to dust. So there is no metal in the construction of that plain pine box. The whole thing is held together by wooden pegs. There's no glue because it should be all natural. If you bury somebody in one of those hermetically sealed titanium casks, they will never return to the earth the way that we tend to prescribe. Yeah. Great. Yeah. So Amy was asking about when you need a vault. They're called vaults. Some cemeteries require that. So the way that the Jewish cemeteries deal with that is that either the vault is covered over on the sides and top, but open on the bottom. The reason for the vault is so that over the years, as the casket degrades, the ground doesn't collapse. So all they care about is holding up the ground over the casket. So if that's not the approach, then what they also will sometimes do is the vault goes all the way underneath the casket, but there are big holes drilled in it. So symbolically, the body can still return to the earth. Yeah.
About what the Hasidim do for burial, because I thought surely they would be using the wooden casket with holes drilled in the bottom. But in New York, there's got to be a lot of Jewish Orthodox people who have to conform to that.
Yeah, I mean, so Carolyn's asking a good question, and I would say this: where there is a will, there is a halachic way.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if you're living in a state that mandates vaults, so you go to the rabbi and say, Rabbi, what do we do? And the rabbi says, okay, here's what we're going to do. And so, it's simply a matter of necessity. They work around it. You might also see sometimes a little bit of a little tiny plastic bag of soil ripped open, kind of sandy soil, sprinkled into the grave with the casket. That's soil from the land of Israel. It's a tradition to reconnect ourselves with the land itself. And people in Denver used to do it a lot. I haven't seen it here so much, a couple times. One other thing you might see when you get to the cemetery is the rabbi might have with him or her a small pile of books that are nicely kind of packaged up together, tied on all sides, 2 or 3 packages maybe, because every synagogue has a genitza, a repository for holy items that shouldn't just be tossed out. So down in our basement, whenever it starts to get to be too much, Jane says, it's time to start burying books. So, so for the next little bit of time, I will show at all my funerals with, a nice package of books. And as the casket is lowered, I'll just reach in and lower I'll ask you first if it's okay, but I'll lower the books in and they'll just join the party. And it's just a way of, returning the holy books to dust also. Yeah, Dennis.
The question, I think you'd mentioned once before that once the casket is sealed, it's never opened again. But I know when my mother died in California, she was buried in Florida. And so the casket is lying there and the funeral home said to me, "Would you please, I'd like you to open up the casket." They want to open up the casket so I can make sure that it is actually my mother that we're burying.
Yep.
So is that something that is commonplace, or even if there's no transportation involved?
Right. Do you remember, did your mother choose Tahara, the washing of the body and the shrouds?
She did not.
So the choice not to open the casket is really connected with Tahara. So once the body has been purified and ready for death, the preference would be not to open the casket. That said, if the funeral director says we need a positive identification and they pop open the box, okay, so there it is, it's done. I think this group of people lives in the real world and recognizes that not everything is, always according to plan.
The other thing is also in the actual burial itself. I know we've gone to several funerals where cemeteries where the participants, the family themselves, filled up the graves.
Oh, we haven't even gotten there yet. Yes. Hold on to that. We're getting there shortly. Yeah, Barbara?
Oh. Is there any prohibition to including anything in the box other than books?
From a traditional point of view, the answer is yes. You would not put other things in there. And by the way, the books don't go in the casket. They go next to the casket in the grave. That said, when somebody wants to include something, I think that's great. I've buried people with music batons because they loved music, or pictures of loved ones, or a note written by someone, or their wedding ring, or yeah, of course, that's not an issue for us.
Just to clarify, when you said that the casket is closed before that you go for the funeral service, I thought I remembered when my mom passed away that we were asked to go and identify it just before the service, though.
Yeah, so that sounds very much like what Dennis experienced.
Yeah.
Again, it could, yeah, that doesn't shock me. They probably think it's going to leave the family more comfortable, just knowing that this is in fact the one we intend to bury. But for the most part, at Jewish funerals, it's a closed casket. I did the same thing with my grandfather. I remember kind of being pushed forward to go see Papa. And boy, that was traumatic. But that's not really what we're talking about. So yeah, that I'm sure that did happen. If Mom had done Tahara, she did.
Wow, I don't know.
Yeah, it's unusual. It's unusual, but not unheard of. Yeah, Carol.
Here. If someone chooses to be buried in a shroud, do they have to do the Tahara?
Ooh, that's a good question. No, I don't suppose you do.
And the other thing is that if someone did choose Tahara, but the burial is not going to be for a few days, this is the part of me that it has a problem, because then the funeral director charges for that. Does he charge for or there is a charge? And does that go on for a couple of days, or do they just do one night and that's it?
If you decide you want shomer, the guarding of the body, then that would go on for as long as it takes to bury the body. It can always be done by loved ones. I've seen grandchildren set up a schedule where they're going to sit, with grandpa's body until burial. So, if the charge is the issue, that would take care of that. I don't know whether it helps you for me to tell you what my choices are going to be, but I don't personally find shomer to be a meaningful ritual. So when, when it comes time for me to state my preferences, I'm going to let Julie know I don't need shomer. I'm not sure about tahara yet. I have to keep thinking about that. But yeah, you would do the tahara once, but then the shomer would continue until burial.
Connection between being buried and shrouded. The question.
Yeah, tahara is the preparation of the body that concludes with being buried in the shroud. Carol was wondering, what if you like the idea of the shroud, but you don't need the washing? And so, yeah, you could just tell the funeral director that I'd like to be buried in a shroud, but I don't want tahara. They may say, really? And you say, darn straight. Okay, let's keep going. We got lots of ground to cover. So you know that we bury quickly. We talked about that. You may also know this kind of behaviorally, but I'll just make it explicit. You don't usually see flowers at Jewish funerals. There are a number of reasons for it, but the pragmatic reason that I've heard is that in other traditions, burial is often delayed by quite a while, and the flowers were helpful in making the room pleasant. When Jews bury rather quickly, there's not as much need to freshen up the room. And so we never developed a tradition of bringing flowers. There's also the second answer to that, which is flowers fade quickly. They're lovely for a Shabbos table, but there are other ways we have of comforting the mourner beside bringing flowers. So if the funeral director asks you if you want to spend $400 on some flower arrangements, you can say, no, thank you. Yeah, Carol.
So when I was in Israel, the Sephardic do have flowers.
Really?
And not only that, is just recently I was on Zoom for a friend's unveiling, and the family is from Israel. The husband is from Israel, and they had the stone, and there were flowers engraved on the stone.
Oh, interesting.
And the son said, the person is buried in a Chabad cemetery in Florida. And he said, the Chabad wants us to remove the flowers, but we're not going to.
Interesting.
Now, another thing that my mother started, because she couldn't stand the sound of the dirt hitting the coffin, is that in our family, we throw roses in. So,
Right,
yeah.
right. We'll talk about the dirt sound in a few minutes. I'm glad you mentioned that. Art?
Is there any prohibition about flowers in a cemetery, in a Jewish cemetery?
Is there a prohibition about flowers? No. No. It's just customary. Yeah. Yeah, you'll see some flowers for sure. Because like lots of things in our modern expression of Judaism, we've always, throughout history, we have shared our traditions with our host communities, and we've absorbed some of theirs. So, young couples, as they get married, are always surprised to find out that, wait, when do I say I do? Well, we don't say that because they've grown up with the movies. And so similarly, there's a lot of traditions around burial that people probably absorb from the prevailing culture, which aren't our tradition, but it doesn't mean you can't. All right. When we've made all the choices, we've prepared our loved one's body, we've purchased a casket, we've arranged the plot. And by the way, plots don't get cheaper. So you can always purchase a plot now and lock in today's prices. So there'll be a chance. Oh yeah, Ellen.
Is there any requirements or exclusions in terms of like the cemeteries and where you're getting buried? I mean, as a silly example, somebody might have told me growing up, if you ever get a tattoo, you're never going to get buried in Jewish cemetery. So I was just wondering if there's anything
That's
like
a great question. So there are two, I guess, Bobemaises. One is what Ellen just said, that if you have a tattoo, you can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery. The second one is if you take your own life, you can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery. Neither of which is true. There is nowadays, did you get the tattoo? Okay, good. I am so sorry, Mom. So see, now you're on the hook, because what I was about to say was that when someone has a tattoo, the assumption is that since getting the tattoo, they have repented and regret it. And so we'll bury them. You can't say, I will sin and repent. So you're screwed. Sorry, Ellen, you cannot go get that tattoo. I've now heard the plan ahead of time. It's not kosher. The second piece too about committing suicide, there are traditional cemeteries that bury those folks at the outskirts. I think that's incredibly cruel. It's not done very much. The assumption in those cases is that just like someone who died of any other disease, you would not penalize someone who died from the disease of mental illness. And so someone who takes their life is usually embraced right there where they would in any other case.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
there's a question asked by someone on the chat.
Oh, thanks, Stu. I appreciate that. Let me see if I can figure out where my cursor is. Okay, ready? There it is. The question is there any Jewish death rituals or prayers that cannot be performed or said by a lay person? Oh man. So here's where I feel this is a risky moment, because this is not a truth that most rabbis will tell you. Okay, you ready? There is nothing in our tradition that a rabbi can do that you can't. I don't say this often, but you have no need for a rabbi for anything. Some states require an ordained clergy for officiating in a marriage, but that's civil law. So no, the answer is you absolutely do not need a rabbi. Every one of you can do the entirety of it. And occasionally I hear about people who do. More common is the unveiling at the end of the year. That's a great moment. For someone who's open to the idea of handling that themselves, I just did it yesterday. I'll hand the person all the materials. They can pick and choose and say, I love this, not so much that. And they lead a little ceremony and they feel so good about themselves. That's do-it-yourself Judaism. That's, reclaiming your privilege, your opportunity to do these things. So who asked that question? Oh, Eric. Yeah. Or is that Elizabeth? I can't see who's there. That's a great question. Les, want to take the microphone?
Is that true for the Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox, as well as conservative and Reform?
Yeah. Yes, it is true for all of us. It may be less common in other traditions, but no, you don't need the rabbi to do any of that. Yeah, Barbara.
When my mother passed away, I called the 3 rabbis that would have any meaning were not available. So I asked Peter Lilienthal to perform it, and he did.
That's perfect. That's a great example. There we go. All right. No more questions. Okay, Ellen, what?
If somebody's Jewish or not, and whether they could be buried in a cemetery. So or a Jewish cemetery.
That's a good question. People at home heard that. I'm not sure the end of it. What about a person who's questionably Jewish or not Jewish? Lots of our families have non-Jewish family members. So at a cemetery like ours, it doesn't even occur to us. Of course, families will be buried together. As far as determining Jewishness, if there's a question, if the cemetery needs documentation or proof, the way you would prove it would be to produce the individual's mother's ketubah. That's the proof of Jewishness, which can be pretty difficult. Sometimes images of gravestones will also work. I just wrote a letter for someone who wants to make Aliyah, and to prove her Jewishness, she sent me images of her family's gravestones. But again, that's not as traditionally used. No. Okay, Carol, what? What about converts? Yeah. So Carolyn is asking about converts. If the question is raised then you're using the wrong rabbi and the wrong cemetery. That, I mean, we know that a conversion that I officiate is not going to be recognized by the state of Israel, by the rabbinate of Israel. The state of Israel, absolutely. The rabbinate, screw them. But anybody who raises the question of Jewishness of a proselyte has sinned, and that's Rambam's clear response. So this should not come up ever again. A person's Jewishness, once they join, we call them Ben Avraham Visara. Your ancestors are my ancestors. We're kin. We don't undo that. You can't undo. You can't convert out of Judaism. You're forever Jewish. Once you're Jewish forever, like it or not. No. Okay, Carol, what?
Okay, so this is about the cemeteries I know in Syracuse, both the conservative and the Orthodox one that my family is buried in have made separate places which have been divided by trees, which is against me, but where someone who's married to a non-Jewish person can be buried in the same cemetery, but in a different place. It's almost like they buried the children outside of the plots.
Yeah.
I don't understand that either.
Yeah. So I'll let you to put down there. So the only thing I'll say about that is I actually find that to be remarkably generous, because they have found a halachic way to meet their will. On the one hand, you could step back and say, that's awful. But the alternative is that their tradition says, no, you can't be buried here at all. So the fact that they create a barrier and effectively end the Jewish cemetery, but right next door create a non-Jewish cemetery for loved ones, is actually a pretty generous gesture. But only if you're willing to see it that way. Okay, I got too much to cover, and we're barely in. So the rabbi will call and sit down with you, talk about all kinds of things, but mostly the three things that I talk about with families between death and burial are how you want the service to look, answering any questions, going through the whole process to make sure everyone's clear, and then getting to know the deceased a little better. Here's something to be thinking about. Part of planning the service is the question, do any of the family members want to speak? And it's always better if you say, yes. I can do a fine eulogy, even if if I've known you for 10 years. I'll never do as good a eulogy as someone who loved you. And so whenever the family says, yeah, we'd like to say a few words, I love that. And then I continue the same intake. I do the life review. I get to know the person better, take lots of notes, and I speak at the end of the eulogies. Sometimes I don't speak at all if there have been too many eulogies and they went too long. But if I have notes about stories of the person's life, and you get up and you tell that story, that's easy for me. I can just skip over it and adjust my comments. Way better than the rabbi speaking first, telling the story you were going to tell, and then you having to get up and say, as the rabbi already said, that's the wrong approach. It should come from you. And so, if you're invited to do so and it feels meaningful, know that it's genuine and it's better. So after that intake, there's usually another day or so before the ceremony itself. You will make your way to the location of the service, and the three choices for where the service happens would be in the sanctuary at your synagogue, or in the chapel at the funeral home, or at the graveside. And there's good reasons for doing all of those. It's a good reason to choose the chapel at the funeral home if you don't have a synagogue and a rabbi. That's when you would choose that. But if you've got a big group, or if you've got elderly people for whom mobility is going to be an issue and may have trouble in the cemetery, Or if you just, you love this place and you want to be here, the service will happen here. And then together we move to the cemetery. And don't worry about if your cemetery is way the hell out in Madelon, New Jersey. That's what I do. Okay. People always feel bad about asking, would you even consider? Of course I would consider. I went up to Rhode Island with a family just a short while ago to bury someone. That's what we do. We're family. I don't go to Queens, but otherwise, but that's not about the distance. Actually, never mind. So the service begins here, and we start with Kriya. That's that black ribbon that you see on lapels, or in some more traditional environments, you'll see a person will actually rip their clothing. That's where the tradition comes from, but we kind of migrated. So if it's meaningful to you, you're feeling rent over the loss of a loved one, and it just feels more appropriate to reach up and grab your shirt collar or pocket and just tear it. Do it. It's called a performative ritual. It's supposed to do something to you. The black ribbon is the stand-in. And, I'll explain this to you when it's time, but it's a symbol. It's got two messages. The first is that the fabric of my soul has been torn. And you can't repair that. You can stitch it up real carefully, but you'll always see the scar, just like the loss of a loved one. The second message is to anyone who knows another tribe member, when they see the black ribbon on your lapel, they know, this person's fragile. I have to treat them lovingly and compassionately. They're in mourning. It's usually worn for 7 days. For all of the categories I described of mourner, it goes over your right side, except when you're burying your mother or father. For a parent, it goes over your left side. So you'll watch me kind of stop and think, left. Yeah, it's got to go on this side. As I'm facing you. Yeah, the black ribbon goes on the right side for when you bury children, siblings, spouses. But if you're burying a parent, it goes over your left side, over your heart.
Reason?
I've heard it said this way, that it's going to sound kind of grim, but the parent role is really the one role you can't replace. And so the space for a parent in one's life is really right there in the heart. I guess their thinking was, in a world where mortality was a lot more ever present, you might get remarried, you might have more children. Your siblings, they're not the same as a parent, but the parent occupies a special place in our lives, and so it gets a special place on our lapel. Okay, so after that, we'll start the ceremony, and the ceremony, when we create it together, is meant to do this. You ready? It is meant to comfort you. I hear all the time, I'll say to someone, what do you think about the 23rd Psalm? And they'll say, oh, Mom hated that one. Well, Mom's not here to complain. So every decision, once we take care of the tactical pieces, every decision is about what you need, not about what you think Dad would have wanted. When we talk about Shiva, it often comes up. How are you feeling about Shiva? Well, Dad would have wanted me to do, 3 days. I don't care what Dad would have wanted. This is for you. It's all about comforting you. So the ceremony, again, is like a la carte. There are psalms and songs and poetry, and you can pay attention now. And when you go to the funerals that you attend and you hear something and you think, oh, I loved that, make a little note and send me a note. I'll put it in your file. We'll make sure it's in your service, or in the service of a loved one, whatever. So we start with some liturgy, depending on how many people are going to speak. If I know there are going to be 9 eulogies, maybe a little less liturgy at the front end. And then we move to the eulogies. I never encourage the thing where we say, would anybody like to say a few words? Oh my God. I will strenuously talk you out of that. but I'll allow it if you insist. So eulogies happen, and then the last piece in the synagogue would be El Malei Rachamim. This is the prayer for the dead. Mourner's Kaddish is not about death. El Malei Rachamim asks God to take over the care of our loved one. We have done everything we can here on earth, and now shelter our loved one under the wings of your presence in all eternity. Let her rest at peace. God is her inheritance, all of those statements. And so it's really a beautiful, beautiful prayer. Once that's said in the synagogue, then we move to the cemetery. And there's a recessional where the casket, if it's there, is rolled down the main aisle. I follow along with something called Siduk Hadin, where I'm reading particular writings. You've probably seen me do it a couple times. And it's just, it's all accompanying the dead. It's all about accompanying the dead for burial. You may have noticed that when we get to the cemetery, there are traditions of stops. Pallbearers are helpful, though not necessary, but helpful. It shouldn't be one of those mourners, by the way, one of those 7 categories. You might have seen the stops that we take. I usually take 3 stops, but 7 is actually the tradition. That only comes from the days when cemeteries were outside of town, and it was a long walk from the synagogue out to the cemetery, and the pallbearers needed breaks. And so they would stop and they'd set down the casket and everyone would rest for a little bit. There might be a little Devar Torah, a little singing or something, and then they'd pick the casket back up and keep going. And so when I stop on the way out to the grave, that's where that holdover is from. It's just tradition. We get out to the grave, and there's very little liturgy at that point, although I usually say a few things, and then we lower the casket. And here comes another element of performative ritual, and that is what Carol was saying is so hard, and that's the burying of our loved one. Some people really like the earthiness of reaching down into the dirt and with their bare hands getting a handful of dirt and putting it in. Most people choose the shovel. Some prefer roses. But either way, what we're doing here is we are ourselves fulfilling the mitzvah of burying our loved one. The Hebrew expression for it is chesed shel emet, or emes, depending on where your family is from. What it means is true, emet is truth, true generosity or compassion or good loving kindness, true loving kindness. Another translation might be altruism, because the tradition says that in every other interaction in life, you might do something nice for someone with maybe the ulterior motive that they have the opportunity to do something nice for you down the road, or maybe you're trying to manipulate or I don't know, sow the seeds of the future. But when you're burying someone, there's nothing else they're going to be doing for you. If you're going through the effort of burying them, it is chesed shel emet. It is true loving kindness. It is altruism. You're not doing it for anything in return. So it's really considered, some say, the greatest of the mitzvot. So tradition is that if you're using a shovel, you'll see people might flip it over and use the back of the spade, which works really poorly. Often you get nothing more than a few pebbles on the back of the spade. And that first shovelful, you put in, and you try to get a little bit of dirt in there. And yeah, you start to hear the sound. It is an eerie sound like none other. It is the sound of clumps of dirt or rocks hitting the top of a casket. And man, if you are in denial, that's going to make it tough to stay there, which is part of the psychology here. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Then we usually flip the spade back over to the proper side and continue shoveling a few more shovelfuls. Sometimes a lot of shovelfuls. Some people want to just keep shoveling and shoveling and shoveling, and that's fine. We do that. We do the shovel upside down thing to demonstrate reluctance or mindfulness. that we're not just chick chock, come on, let's get this done. We're taking our time. We're slowing things down. We're using it inefficiently because we don't really want to be burying our loved one. We would rather be out having dinner with them. Then when we're done with our shovelfuls, rather than turning around to the person behind you in line and handing them the shovel, that's way too efficient. You take it and you just stick it in the pile of dirt and let them come over and take it themselves. Again, just inefficiency for its own sake. In some traditions, the casket should be completely covered. So the dirt has been filled in above casket level. In some places, they fill it all the way up to the ground level. Usually what I do is just wait until the top of the casket is covered. And once that's happened, then we can say Kaddish. And that's the first time that we say Kaddish for that loved one. And again, traditionally, it would be the 7 mourners, categories of mourners who are saying Kaddish, but anybody who wants to is welcome to. And then 1 or 2 more little details before I pause and take questions. Once we've said Kaddish, there are a few more little statements of tradition that I make, and then it's time to leave that space. And so the tradition is that all of those gathered who are not those 7 categories of mourners, you're all there for the purpose of comforting the mourner. You might feel sad about the deceased and you might miss them, but you're not one of the 7 categories. So your job is to comfort them. So all the other people form 2 lines, 2 parallel lines facing each other. And the 7 categories of mourners, once that line is, that column is created back towards the vehicles, the mourners will all slowly walk down back towards the vehicles between those 2 lines. And the symbolism is just that you're surrounded on both sides by the people who showed up, the people who to whom you mean enough that they're there for you. And it's just a demonstration of love and support. When you get back to the cars, one of 3 things will happen, or 4 things. Either the funeral director will have a little table there with a little kind of a bucket of water with a spigot and be ready for you to wash your hands. Or you might drive out to the entrance of the cemetery if it's a fully Jewish cemetery and they may have a washing station, and people pull over, get out of their car, walk over to the washing station and do a traditional wash. Or you drive all the way to the Shiva house, and on the front porch, there's a basin with some water on it and some paper towels, and they'll pour the water onto their hands before going into the Shiva house, or none of that. But the tradition here is that the impurity of a dead body is meant to be left behind. So we talked about this, I think, with the Kohanim, right? They don't want to be tainted with death, and so they stay out of cemeteries. The rest of us, when we're tainted by death, we make a spiritual distinction by just a little hand washing. It's just a way of saying, I am leaving this place and re-entering the world of the living. I'm going to not bring with me the energy of this place. So let me pause there and see if anyone has any questions or observations, or did I forget anything? Yeah, Carol, want to take the microphone?
Okay, 2 things come to mind. I must be on someone's list. If you need someone to talk at a funeral, call Carol. But I had to do a Jewish service for my uncle who was being buried at his wife's request in a Catholic cemetery.
Mm-hmm.
That was I still can't visit that place now. The other one was when my friend had been cremated, and they were burying her remains, and they had this tiny shovel, like yeah.
Interesting.
So of course I turned it over, and it was a rabbi. It was up at Chautauqua. And so I turned it over first, just because it was so ridiculous, and put the first shovel through it, and then continued. And the rabbi said, oh, well, then he did a teaching moment, because
Wow.
Carol said,
I've done a couple of burials of cremains, and I don't remember how the shoveling all worked out. You're right. It's a tiny little hole. So it doesn't require a whole lot of shoveling. I don't remember if we just filled it in very quickly and easily. That's funny. That's funny. Dennis?
You haven't, I mean, you mentioned briefly the unveiling, but you haven't really talked about. I know usually it takes place, I think, 11 to 12 months after the funeral is.
Yep.
But we attended an ultra Orthodox service who's one of the sons had buried. They were burying his mother. His mother was being buried, and he was insistent upon that a stone be put up for her, like ASAP. So like it was 24 hours. He wanted for some reason or other. And I was just wondering, do you have more knowledge?
He's a Lubavitch Jew. And he said her soul will not go up to God unless the stone is there. Perhaps symbolizing the completion of that year. It's not a year, it was 24 hours later.
Yeah. I don't know, but this is not the first time I've heard of Chabad Lubavitch having non-traditional interpretations. I've never heard of that before. Yeah. Yeah. They were saying that they know of a case where a Lubavitch family insisted that the stone had to be put in place within 24 hours. The headstone, yeah. It usually takes most of a year to get the thing. Lest you think I'm kidding, the lead time on gravestones is ridiculous. I mean, like 6 months. It's crazy. I don't know how this industry functions, but you put your order in and, it might still not be ready in 6 months. By the way, if you're choosing a headstone that has Hebrew on it, usually the monument maker will provide you with a form to fill out with a key of the letters and numbers, and you put in, the number 5 if you want a shin, or the number 11 if you want a lump, whatever. So usually families give that to me to fill out, or at the very least, they send it over to me to check, and then again, once it's submitted, the monument maker will send you a proof before they carve the stone. And usually the families will send that to me just to double check. So, oh, thank you. So Joan says, is it a Bubba Misa that pregnant women should not go to the cemetery? Yes, it is. They might still choose not to, but it is about the evil eye and wanting not to give the angel of death easy access to an as yet unborn baby. So you will hear women say that they're not going to go. And then Carol asks, I heard that unveilings are an American tradition. Not exactly. The unveiling, and we're getting way ahead of ourselves, but that's okay because we're going to run out of time anyway. Unveilings come from the idea of consecrating a monument. And both the idea of the consecration and the length of time of 11 months or a year are both resident in Jewish tradition. The monument comes from the idea, the piece of the Torah where Jacob is on the road when his beloved Rachel dies. And so he lays her to rest along the road, and he creates a monument of stones, a burial tower over her body to protect it, but also to mark the burial space. So the idea that we took, and this is something I wrote for my unveiling ceremonies, he took stones from the field that until that very moment had been nothing special. But when he put them into a pile of rocks over his beloved, they became sanctified. So similarly, when you order a piece of granite or marble or whatever you're choosing, it came out of a quarry somewhere and it was nothing special until it became consecrated for use to mark your loved one's spot. So there's where the Jewish origin comes from. The timeline, as far as waiting a year, has to do with what Dennis kind of alluded to a moment ago. There are 3 periods of decreasing intensity of mourning. The first 7 days, Shiva, is the most intense, with the most restrictive limitations on what mourners traditionally would do. You're not showering, you're not having sex, you're not leaving the house, you're not looking in the mirror or putting on deodorants and shaving and whatnot. The next 3 weeks leading up to 30 days, or shloshim, have different restrictions based on which mourner you are, but usually you don't go to concerts or parties. You're still kind of a negative Nelly, right? You're still a downer. So you shouldn't go to parties where you're going to pull everyone else down. Then the next 11 months or 12 months is the final period, and that's for a person who's mourning their parent. It includes, in traditional environments, saying Kaddish every day. What other limitations there are? It might include weddings and parties then too, but I don't know if I'm right about that. Usually people stop saying Kaddish at 11 months because the teaching is that when you say Kaddish, it offers a little extra credit in God's judgment of your soul, of the deceased's soul. So if your mother dies, you're saying Kaddish, and just on the off chance that God was iffy, like, I don't know, is she getting into heaven or not? Every time you say Kaddish, it helps a little bit. And if you said Kaddish for a full 12 months, for the worst person, it would do the job. So we stop at 11 months to show this honor for our mother, our father, that they weren't the worst. So 11 months is sufficient for a parent. A quick word about this. It does happen that you might be invited to say Kaddish for your parent every day, especially men. And if you're offered that, you can say, yes, I plan to say Kaddish for the year. It might be when you're at shul on the Friday nights you come. You might decide to wake up every morning and join a minyan and say Kaddish, but you might not. And if you say to that offerer, yeah, I don't think that's my tradition, they may say to you, we'd be happy to say it for you. Chabad is notorious for this, for offering to say Kaddish for your father. They won't set a price, but the insinuation is there. I do not get this. Frankly, it upsets me. In the same way that some years ago, I proposed, and then we did get rid of the Mishaberach list, because a person, in my mind, can't put their buddy on the Mishaberach list, knowing that a bunch of strangers are at shul and hearing the name, but what does it really mean, while he goes out to the Capitol Grill for dinner that night. So I always feel like if it's important enough to you that the prayer is said, you'll show up and say it. If it's not important enough to you, then it doesn't matter if I say it for you. Same thing with Kaddish. I don't think you can outsource this. So don't let them guilt you into thinking that you're somehow neglecting your father's soul if you decline the offer to say Kaddish for him every day. Dennis?
Our son did it for me.
Yep, that's probably a
Because
little different.
he goes to shul 3 times a day, so
Yep.
for him, it's not a burden at all.
Yeah,
And
that's
I
a little
found it
different.
as a kindness, I really did.
Yeah, that's a good example
Yeah.
where it's appropriate. Leslie, and we'll make our.
You had mentioned 11 months. Does the period really start from the time you leave the cemetery, the time of the burial?
Yes.
Okay.
Right. Shiva and counting is from burial.
So that would be 12 months from then.
11 months, right? Yes, but then the yard site is on the day of death. It's not the day of burial.
Right.
Art?
Take a stone and put it on the grave. But what tradition does that come from?
Yeah. So when the headstone has been placed and we return for unveiling, and then every time we return after that, Art's reminding us of the tradition of placing a stone. So number one, it comes from the same tradition I mentioned with Jacob, building sort of a funeral bier for his beloved. We're doing the same thing. The second thing is that it is a way of communicating to everybody else walking through the cemetery that whoever is buried there hasn't been forgotten. That, when there's a nice little pile of stones, it means that, there's still people thinking about that person. And flowers, again, flowers wilt and they're gone quickly. Stones, they stay.
So comment on the stones. My grandparents and extended older family is all buried on the same horrible Long Island Jewish cemetery. But when we go, my parents always put stones on their friends' parents' graves so that they will be remembered and somebody's thinking of them.
That's nice.
So we have to make the whole tour of the entire cemetery. But 2 questions. So the unveiling you said is usually at 12 months only for a spouse
No.
or
For everybody.
for everybody?
Mhm.
So is it incorrect to do it ahead of time?
No, no.
It's just,
No, and it's not incorrect to do it 3 years later.
Okay.
You know, it's these are helpful traditions. So when it feels when it's right, you do it.
okay.
By the way, apropos of your first comment, there is a tradition that nobody obeys or upholds, and that is that when you go all the way out to Long Island to bury grandma, as long as you're out there, you think, I'm just going to put stones on everybody else's grave, and you're not supposed to. Because if you're making a cemetery visit just to visit graves, great. But when we go out to a cemetery for the burial of one person, the tradition is not to place stones on other graves. But how many times do we get our tuchus out to Long Island or to New Jersey? So it happens all the time. I never tell someone, oh, don't you dare put that on that grave. You know, because it's just pragmatic.
Then my other question is about saying Kaddish. Do you need to have a minyan or can you say Kaddish at home?
Well, traditionally, you'd want a minyan. There are lots of ways to achieve a minyan. You can do a minyan online. There are lots of synagogues, especially since COVID, that have begun daily online minyans. You can find a local synagogue that is doing a minyan. You know, Agudas Shalom has a minyan every day. If you, yeah. So you can make it happen, but Carol.
There are 4 Hebrew letters on a lot of the tombstones in this Orthodox cemetery. What are they?
The letters are Tav, Nun, Bet, Tav, I think. I might be wrong. What it stands for is Tihi Nishmato Tzrura B'Tzrur HaChaim, which means may her soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. The other thing you sometimes see are 2 letters that are engraved, and it's a Pei and a Nun with a little chuk in between, and it stands for Po Nikbar, which means here lies or here is buried. Good. I didn't expect that question. Good one. Okay. I'm going to say a couple more things, and then if we've got time, I'll take questions. I promise. Oh, I don't care. Meryl says, my mother taught that it was a way to give charity to a poor person. You mean saying Kaddish for someone that they could sort of take on that job, and it was a way of doing tzedakah. That's lovely. I hadn't ever thought about it that way, but yeah. Okay, thank you. I'm not going to go through all the traditions around a Shiva house. There are lots of them. You probably on some level are familiar with most of them. The idea here, though, is that for that period of time, whatever you choose, whether it's 1 day or 3 days or 7 days, it is designed to keep you focused. And so all the mechanisms of the Shiva house are designed to stay right there. I mean, both physically, but also mentally and emotionally. It is the perfect way to avoid denial or other forms of repression. You know, when you have to sit there and confront this loss for all these days, it sinks in. As a person visiting the mourner, you're not supposed to be taken care of. So that's why when we walk up to the front door, we just go straight in. Because to ring the doorbell means that the mourner has to stand up and come over and let you in, and now they're taking care of you. And they always want to say, what can I get you to drink? And you say, nothing. What can I get you to drink? You say lovingly, sit down, sweetie. I appreciate that, but I'm here for you, not the other way around. There's always too much food. They always want to try to pack up food and send it home with you. Traditionally, you don't do that. But I find that it can actually be really agitating for people who see that the food is going to get wasted if you don't take it. So I say, fine, I'll be happy to take it, especially if it's corned beef. It's much easier to convince me if it's corned beef. At the end of the period, again, whatever length of time you've chosen, and don't let someone guilt you into more or less than what you think. You know, we'll go there with you if it, regardless of the length. The tradition at that point is to, again, a performative ritual brings you back into the world. And so you may have been sitting on low stools or on the cushions of the couch, or a couch without cushions, or low chairs. The tradition is to stand up at the end of Shiva and to go for a little walk around the block or around the neighborhood, slowly, intentionally, as a family, or by yourself. And just, you've been cooped up in the house for that time. It's been heavy, the emotional, and you get outside and suddenly the fresh air just feels really good. And it's a mechanism to help get you back into life a little bit. One other little suggestion: when you go to make a Shiva call and you approach the mourner, do so with a plan in mind about how you want to interact. You're there to comfort the mourner, not the other way around. So you may want to talk about the deceased, but he may have been doing that for the last 3 days and might be exhausted and might just want to talk about baseball. And so the tradition is actually to just quietly come over and just sit down without a word. Just sit down next to them and let them drive the conversation. Or maybe at the minimum, sit down and say, "I'm sorry." That's it. The goal being that you're not forcing them to talk about anything that they don't want to talk about anymore. If you're the mourner and you're exhausted, you should go upstairs and take a nap. Don't worry about being a hostess to your guests. That's not the way this party works. Okay. You shouldn't feel apologetic about any of that. Yep. Couple comments. Where'd it go? Is it microphone? Oh, there it is.
Last week or the week before, my Jewish Learning had a page on, can you sit Shiva for somebody beyond the 7? A friend, somebody you consider a second mother or a second father. And the bottom line answer was, yes, you can.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I would have lovingly said no. They might be a second mother. You wouldn't have sat longer than 7 for your own mother. Because the fear is that we can get stuck in stages of grief. And so the length of these windows of time is somewhat intentionally chosen to give us sufficient time for that degree of grief. But after that 7 days, it's time to start moving into the next phase.
It would be during the 7 days of Shiva, leaving the 7 people out. But if my mother's best friend, who was my second mother, died, I would be permitted to sit Shiva
Oh,
for
I'm
her.
sorry. I thought you were asking whether a person could sit for 10 days. I didn't understand. Yeah, of course. That's right. Amy?
So I've been at Shiva homes that are either extremely mournful and sad and quiet. And then I've been at others where it's like a celebration of life, right? And there are pictures everywhere and photo albums. And is there a right or a wrong, or is it just kind of what
No.
the family's comfortable with?
I wouldn't say there's a right or a wrong. Though you're absolutely right. And there are a few other configurations I've experienced along the way. But it generally, those two extremes tend to be whether the loss was tragic or not. When it's a 94-year-old grandma who is vibrant and sharp until a week ago, and then you went downhill real quick, that's a celebration usually. Sometimes the grandkids or great grandkids are busted up, but for the most part, we're pretty reasonable about that loss. When it's a 16-year-old kid, that's a very different situation. So it has to do with whether the family experiences this as a tragedy. Yeah, that's a good observation. Wait, is this a question from before?
No. Well, actually, it was just a comment, actually. The Institute of Jewish Spirituality does a daily meditation. And during that daily meditation each day, they do recite Kaddish, which is really quite beautiful. I just thought it was a good
Yeah.
resource for people.
Mark, you use that every day? Almost every day? Yeah. Yeah. The Institute for Jewish Spirituality is one of, I think, the best organizations out there. I'm an alum of their 2-year rabbinic program, and I think almost everything they do is fabulous. So yes, I highly recommend that. It's a short daily meditation at lunch. So if you're, if you just need a touch point every day, it's a great way to just be with other people. And they say Kaddish. That's exactly right. Thank you. So here's what I want to do for the last couple minutes. I want to propose the kinds of things that you might want to be thinking about now, either for yourself or for loved ones who are on their way. Okay. The kinds of things that you might want to be thinking about include, I mentioned, funeral plots. There are lots of little things to do after death. The more you can take care of those now, the easier it is, not just on the person you leave behind, but especially on kids, so that they don't have to wonder. Related to the same thing, it's going to sound like I'm a salesman, but you can do funeral prearrangements now with a funeral home. Just make sure someone knows that you did it. So you can approach the funeral home. You can pay for all the pieces you want at today's prices. You can pick your casket. You can make all your wishes known, so that when your kids approach the funeral director and they say, I don't know what to, he's going to say, your parents took care of all this. It's all paid for. They let us know what they want. Here, we just have to pick the day. So prearrangements. I think you took it differently than I meant it, but so barring that, if you don't go that far, then the next thing you might want to make sure you do is find someone and share with them what you want, if you have feelings on the matter. I do it all the time with people. They make an appointment with me because they don't trust their kids are going to remember what they said, or they don't have kids, or they don't, whatever. They come and sit with me and we talk about their funeral. God willing, it's not for another 20 years, but they let me know what they want, so that when I'm sitting with their kids and we're talking about the service, I can say, now, I talked to Dad, and he actually had said to me that he really loves the 23rd Psalm. You guys good with doing that? Dad really wanted that. So you can let somebody know, that can be a partner or your kids or a neighbor or a friend or the rabbi or the funeral director. These are things you can do now. The next thing that I'll just put out there, if you're not already on top of this, is to be thinking about an advanced medical directive. These are legal documents that are very easy to fill out. I actually have a stack of them in my office. I meant to bring them. I can hand them to you if you want them, but they go on file. And Ellen, you probably know more about this than I do, but they're your legal directions regarding your own care should you become unable to dictate. You can pick a medical proxy, if you haven't already. It's usually a spouse or a child, but if you don't like your spouse or child, you can pick someone else. But the advanced medical directive is the one that says, if I am, if I've gone into cardiac arrest, I want you to do everything you can to get me back. Or, if there's no likelihood of returning to a quality of life, I want you to let me go. Or, there's all kinds of what ifs. And so advanced medical directives are really valuable. So you can just be thinking about that. And as promised, the last thing I'll say is just a little explanation. And is that Art? I think, is that you that's letting me know my time is up? What's beeping? Is it this? Who's beeping? You can hear the beeping, right? Nobody can hear that? Thank you, Amy. God. Yeah. Okay. It really upset me when none of you could hear that. It was like right here. Anyway, the ethical wills class, which is coming up soon. Is it next week, or I don't know, whenever it starts? I want to make sure that everyone understands what an ethical will is. It has nothing to do with the legal will that you create with your lawyer. It's not about bequeathing any things or any wealth or any directions in that sense. An ethical will is the statement or bequest of wisdom and self that you might like to leave behind for someone who will want to read it, for a grandkid or a niece and nephew, or a spouse or a best friend, whatever. This is your thoughtful process of discerning what you have to say. And so we'll go through a process of understanding what ethical wills can look like, and they can take the shape of computer written letters, or it can be a handwritten note. They can take the form of a video that you record of yourself looking at the camera and speaking to loved ones. It can be a recording that you make of yourself, the audio. It can be any form. We'll talk about all the options. But if the idea of pausing at this point in your life and stepping back, Dennis wrote a beautiful one when we did this this session years ago. I don't know why I always remember you.
Everybody's crying like a baby all the time.
That could, yeah. Yeah.
So I finally said, well, you know, either I can have it read at my funeral or I'll send it out to my family now. And I sent it out to my family.
Yeah.
The only person that ever reacted to was one of my daughters.
Wow.
They're great.
Yeah. Well, so they can be used in all kinds of ways. They can be read at a funeral. They can be shared before you're gone, or you can put in place a mechanism that your letter or your will, your ethical will, gets to the recipient after you're gone. You know, if you want it to arrive on your first yard site after death, give it to me and tell me what you want. And then when you die on April 19th, whatever, 2052, see what I did there? Then April 19th, 2053, I'll make sure that your loved one gets it. And wow, what a powerful voice to hear from you after they've kind of packaged their memory together. So that's what that class is. I've had several people say to me already, "Oh, I've already got a will," and so I have to keep explaining what this ethical will notion is. Yeah, that's great. That's great. Dennis, for those of you at home, Dennis just said you should all take the class. All right. Anything else from people at home? Thank you for, you were sort of quiet this evening. I'm really glad everyone was able to join us. I recorded the session, so if I said too much too quickly, you can by all means go back and rewatch the thing. But this has been a really wonderful series, especially at the second session, which would have been so different if you hadn't all helped me fix that. So I really loved this conversation with you. Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.